Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. Hello and welcome to today's episode. Today I'm here with Dr Louise Oliver, who is a GP and a functional breathing practitioner and therapeutic life coach. So welcome to the podcast, Louise. It's great to have you on. I'm really excited to chat with you. So first of all, if you could just share your journey into learning about breathing and what it was that brought you to this area.
Fantastic. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really pleased that you invited me to speak. Essentially, if you want the truth, I came really disillusioned with medicine probably about 8 or 9 years ago. I came a doctor to help people, and I genuinely felt like what I was doing was not really helping. Sometimes in complex medical problems, you get to the point where traditional medicine runs out of options. And I just randomly chose to learn about mindfulness, and I've gone on this really unstructured journey learning about neuroscience, the mind-body-breath connection. And then along the journey, I started snoring in my perimenopause, and then recognised my body was trying to tell me that I wasn't breathing efficiently. And obviously my sleep was awful when I was snoring, and I improved how I breathed. And for me, my snoring stopped. My sleep is like the best it's ever been. And I can exercise with greater ease, and I just feel so much calmer. So why doesn't everyone know this? So that's why I've started running courses to help people breathe as nature intended.
Yeah, and so you knew you were breathing in your sleep, you were snoring. Was that because you could tell, or did someone else tell you about that? How did you find out that your breathing wasn't optimal?
Yeah, and we don't talk enough, do we, about the sleeping partners? Because obviously my sleep was disturbed and I was grumpy and all the rest of it. I knew I was waking up and going to the toilet a lot, but yeah, he told me and then you end up in separate bedrooms, don't you? And then they're grumpy because you've disturbed their sleep. So it affects both of you, and I see this all the time with people. And when we're asleep, that is our unconscious breathing pattern. So it is giving you some feedback on how you're breathing. So if you're sleeping with your mouth open, your breathing is noisy, you're stopping breathing during sleep, your body is telling you that your unconscious breathing pattern is not efficient. So it's not as efficient as nature intended it to be. So I would take some note on that and sort of think about how you're going to deal with that.
And so, yeah, my mum's partner snores like that. She has to sleep in another room when she goes. She doesn't live with him, so it's only like a few times when she goes and visits. But she's always complaining about it, and she's like, "Oh, I have to go and sleep somewhere else," and it's really disruptive. But it's like, how do you deal with that? How do you change, because it's unconscious?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What can you do about that?
So I think the first concept is for people just to realise that just because breathing is generally automatic, it doesn't mean it's automatically efficient. And it partly because, we are living in a world and we're living in a world that we're not living as biologically programmed, essentially, are we? So, we're not living as our ancestors have been programmed to live. And so we're not necessarily breathing as nature intended. People sometimes think it's a weird concept, but if you think about a baby when it comes into the world, it is nasal breathing. That is how we've been designed to breathe. And we can breathe through the mouth, and we can breathe noisy in upper chest, but it's inefficient. So that's going to affect sport, and it'll affect sleep. So just having that concept helps. So, how efficient is my breathing? So I think, people need to be aware about the concept and then think about how to assess themselves. So obviously, if they're noisy breathing, stopping breathing during sleep, it's clearly not efficient, but you can get some clues in the day as well. If you see your shoulders move well and you're breathing through your mouth. When you're at rest, your breathing's noisy, your breathing's irregular, or you're holding your breath a lot. You sigh a lot, you yawn a lot, you've got nasal congestion. All these things suggest you're not breathing as well as you could do. And then when people are ready to take some action, the simplest thing is, can you bring yourself back to nasal breathing? Just intermittently, I'd say like every time you get a drink, every time you go to the toilet, how about just saying to yourself, is my mouth open? Is my mouth closed?
Mm.
And just bring yourself back to nasal breathing. But it involves lots of, if you're trying to get rid of snoring, it involves lots of things. We need to get the mouth closed, the tongue needs to be in the correct position. We talk about strength training, but are we talking about strength training the respiratory muscles? So the muscles around the throat, so the muscles around the breathing tube that we breathe through, and the muscles that bring the air in, so our diaphragm, which is the big muscle underneath our ribs, and also the muscles, and the muscles in between the ribs, they get weaker unless we're strength training those. So one simple way of doing that is try and maintain nasal breathing with exercise, because you're having to pull that air in, bigger volumes of air through a narrow airway. So are we strength training those, and are we over breathing? And this is the massive thing that I see, is a lot of us are breathing in excess of what our body needs. So breathing in a bigger volume than we need biologically at that moment in time. And that's a big problem for sport, because you're over breathing at rest. So you're going to hit your maximum breathing capacity earlier than you would do if you were breathing a normal volume at rest. And obviously, if you're shifting a bigger volume in and out of your airway, it is more likely to rattle, so that's snoring, and it's more likely to collapse, that's obstructive sleep apnea. So there's lots of different aspects to it, and improving how you breathe is one aspect to it. There are other lots of different people, specialities that can help, and it sort of depends on the person. It needs almost like a personalised multidisciplinary team approach to it. We're not there in the NHS yet, but hopefully we'll.
No, it's really interesting because we talked briefly about the book Breathe by James Nestor before I pressed record, and you said that you thought everyone should read that, and it lays out a lot of this stuff about nasal breathing that you mentioned. When I read the book, I was like, wow, you read it and you're like, oh my God, what happens to them when they just mouth breathe? They did an experiment, didn't they? And it was horrendous what they ended up like. It sounded awful. And so I was, implementing it into just my daily life. And I'm not too bad in daily life, but I tried it when running, and it's really hard to do. So someone came back to me, they said, I read that book and I tried it, and they were like, it's really hard. And I said, just start, very slow, and just don't, you can't go out and expect to be nasal breathing the full run, because it's just not going to happen. And you have to be running quite easily to be able to get that pattern started in the first place. Have you ever tried nasal breathing when exercising, or have you got any recommendations for that?
So the exactly as you say. So there's various considerations. So obviously it is normal when we are exercising for our breathing volume to increase. So that's normal. But people really need to understand, what's my baseline. So if you're already over breathing at rest, that's a problem for sport, and it's massively. We talk about nutrition and strength. I mean, I'm not a sports coach. But there's a lot of, particularly with professional athletes, the psychology, the strength training, nutrition, sleep, etc., etc. But the thing that stops them, once they hit their peak breathlessness, they can't push any harder. But then I think there's this complete lack of recognition of, well, how my baseline breathing at rest and while sleeping, how good is that? And if you're breathing quite fast and you make it more efficient and you bring it down here so it's really efficient, you can. So if you start at a low base, you can do so much more exercise before you hit that peak. Whereas if you're already sort of short of breath or slightly breathing too fast, bigger volume at rest, you can't do as much before you hit that. So I think in sport, a real you know, if someone's a sports coach and you're taking people away for, I don't know, an event, and someone's snoring, your athlete is shouting at you, I am not breathing efficiently. It's a problem because they'll gas out too soon when they're doing their exercise, but it's also a problem because it's affecting their recovery when they're asleep.
Mm.
Their body will be prioritizing breathing rather than repair and recover. And that's
Right.
a problem. And I think hopefully over time that will come through in the sports world. So it's much easier to do it at rest, and trying to make sure that you're breathing lightly and gently. We shouldn't be hearing ourselves breathe at rest. You know, if you're sat next to someone, I hear it all the time. And you can hear them breathe at rest. Obviously, if they've got medical problems,
Yeah.
I get that. But sometimes, even with medical problems, there's an element of inefficient breathing that can be removed. And even though they've got asthma or whatever, um, how much of it is asthma and how much of it is inefficient breathing, and it can be quite amazing. Um,
Mm.
so and so think about how you're breathing at rest, and think about how you're breathing when you're asleep. As soon as you open your mouth, one study said you instantly start breathing an extra 800 milliliters of air per minute. I
Wow.
mean, a pint, that's over a pint. And you're getting it through an airway. If you've got an airway the size of a thumb, you're lucky. And you shift it. The effort involved in that's a problem. So try and make sure that you definitely nasal breathing with lips sealed at rest and while you're sleeping. And the other aspect with sport is it depends on the size of your nasal cavity. So not the size of your nose. So the nasal cavity is the area behind the nose, and you get the idea of the size of it. If you put your tongue on the behind the top of your front teeth
Mm.
and run your tongue all over the back of your hard palate, that's your nasal cavity. So the
Okay.
hard palate, the roof of your mouth, is your floor of your nasal cavity. And we've all got different shaped palates. We've got different amount of how far our cheekbones are out. So it depends on the size of the nasal cavity as to how much air you can shift in and out before you're forced to go to nasal breathing. So there's that aspect. But I've seen people, sprinters at the Olympics, if you were looking very
Mm.
carefully, and that they had good facial structure, some of them were winning medals with nasal breathing if you looked very, very carefully.
Right.
So
Wow.
you can, but you would need a really good nasal cavity, and you would need to have trained yourself so that your breathing's really efficient at rest. So there's different aspects to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think you definitely have to build up to
Yeah,
and
yeah. And
train
I,
and
I do
train.
I do all my running's nasal breathing now, so I
Okay.
don't even up hills. Um, yeah, so I do it. And now obviously I'm not at the level of the athletes that you work with, but yeah, all my sport is nasal breathing. So
Mm.
but obviously if you're an elite athlete, there will be you will this potentially will switch to mouth breathing um at some point, but it's not as efficient. But obviously, as an athlete, you want to get that last bit of performance out, don't you,
Mm.
to cross the finish line? Whereas me at my stage in life, I don't want extra oxidative stress or anything like that. So
Yeah.
my nose is my barometer of my activity.
Yeah, I tried it with intervals because I do like it, interval training sometimes, and I was doing it on a 3 minute interval, and I thought, right, I'll try for the first, and I could manage about a minute of hard running before I had to switch on the intervals. So it was quite interesting. It's kind of an interesting experiment to do because it's like it forces you to think, and actually some of it is a bit of panic. I
Yeah,
think we kind of get in a panic. And the other thing that I've done, and which might be interesting to think about, is in swimming obviously we have to breathe, from side to side. We have to be comfortable breathing fully out in the water, exhaling, fully, because a lot of people don't do that, and then they'll sort of take another breath before they're ready. So another thing that I was doing when I'd read that book is trying to like swim along the bottom all the way along, just kicking and holding my breath for that amount of time. And there is talk in the triathlon world sometimes of hypoxic breathing, like limiting the amount of times you breathe so that you improve your lung capacity and things. Is that something that you think is helpful and can help people?
So the first thing with swimming, obviously with swimming, you breathe through your mouth in the water, and that's just
Yeah,
you can't nasal breathe. So, and
no.
I always forget to say that. So, but remember with swimming, you often don't overbreathe with swimming because you've got the pressure of the water around you. It limits how much
Right.
overbreathing you can do, and it's interesting how sometimes you get athletes who are very athletic and then you get them to try and swim and they can't cope, they're feeling quite breathless.
Yeah.
And I would say to those, like, just have a little think about how efficiently you're breathing, because is it that you're struggling with the swimming, not because of just technique, but is it because your breathing's restricted and that's what's making you feel slightly panicked? But on land, you're fine because you can compensate by basically over breathing. But in the water, you're struggling because of that. There can be other reasons for it, of course, but yeah, so with swimming, mouth breathing is absolutely fine. And but definitely, so these what people don't realise is, and I got taught this at medical school, but I didn't understand the practical applications of it. And I literally, when I did my breath training, I got my 30-year-old medical school book out. I was like, I'm sure I got taught this, was looking through it. But essentially, no one should ever say take a bigger breath to get more oxygen, because biologically and physiologically that doesn't make sense. Because I breathe in, so at sea level I breathe in and 21% of the air is oxygen. I breathe out and 16% of the air is oxygen. So I have not used up all my oxygen. So I'll just say that again, 21% as I breathe in, this is at rest at sea level, and I breathe out, 16% is still oxygen in the out breath. So I have not used all my oxygen, so taking a bigger breath will not help. I'm throwing out the excess. Even at full, peak capacity, it's not zero oxygen on the exhale. So bigger breaths to get more oxygen is just untrue. That's one aspect. So what helps release that oxygen to the tissues? Because that's obviously what we want in sport, isn't it? And there's three things. So one is heat, and you'll know that the importance of warming up the muscles to help performance. And essentially, you've warmed up your cold muscle, and that's going to help the oxygen that's on the blood cells release into the tissue. So we know that. The two other things, so one is to do with sort of altitude training. So when our body adapts to altitude or low oxygen, we create something that helps release it. So definitely hypoxic training can help, and we know that, don't we, because athletes go off and do altitude training. But the other aspect is acid. So essentially our waste product, carbon dioxide, is an acid. And when we've got more carbon dioxide around, it helps release oxygen to the tissues. And I think this is the bit that is fascinating, and I see makes such a difference. So exactly what you were doing with the interval training. So if, say, like we were both doing that, and I said to you, let's do the interval training and keep your mouth closed, and that time when you're like, I have to open my mouth, just stop and let's see. And I may be able to do more than you now because I've worked on that. But I would initially, I would have had to stop very quickly, because what happens is we've all got personal tolerance to our waste product. So as you're exercising, you're producing more carbon dioxide. That's normal. That extra carbon dioxide is a signal that you need more oxygen to the tissue, so it helps release it. But you've got chemoreceptors, so receptors in the back of our brain, so in our breathing center. And when you hit those receptors, you get a feeling of air hunger. So I call it air hunger. And that people experience it differently. So some may feel slightly suffocated, some might feel that they're not getting enough air in, they need to take a big gasp, or they feel like they need to take a big breath. So it feels like there's some sort of uncomfortable, panicky sensation. And obviously there's a layer of psychology that can go on there as well, if that maybe we can talk about at another point. But you hit your tolerance to it. But we can train that. And you can train it so that you that feeling of suffocation, that air hunger, it comes in later. So it allows more carbon dioxide into your muscles.
Mm.
And I think as women, particularly as women transition through perimenopause and menopause, this is my own personal observation. I've got no data apart from my clinical experience to say this, but I think women become more carbon dioxide intolerant as they go through the menopause.
Right.
And the way that they cope with that is obviously if you feel slightly suffocated, what do you do to make that feel better?
Yeah.
You just start to overbreathe,
Yeah.
don't you? Because you want to get rid of that sensation. But that overbreathing is actually making your breathing worse. And you, unless someone tells you, you just go in a downward spiral with it. So yes, so I think hypoxic training is very useful, but you can do, and this might get a bit too technical, you can do hypoxic training where you're doing it with um, higher carbon dioxide levels. So you're working on
Okay.
two of the three we've just discussed, or you do hypoxic training, and some people do seem to do it with low carbon dioxide. But for me, that doesn't quite make sense because then you're only working on one instead of you could be working on two on that, two of the
Okay.
things that help release the oxygen to the tissues.
So how do you do that? What's the kind of method, or is this
So
going to get really
it,
tricky?
it might get so essentially so first of all, the for me, hypoxic training is that is really high level stuff. You know, like
Yeah.
to do hypoxic training, you need to breathe efficiently first. And
Right.
just because people are athletes, it does not mean they're necessarily breathing efficiently, because
Yeah.
you know
That's
you
true.
can overbreathe with exercise, and there's a stress that comes with competing. You know, and sometimes that stress means that people's pushes their breathing pattern towards a more inefficient pattern. So
Mm.
the first thing is because hypoxic training is like an additional, you know what I mean? It's a really high
Mm.
level. So work on functional breathing first. You know, are you breathing efficiently at rest while moving and sleeping? And actually then the exercises that I teach on my courses are it's about we actually practice essentially under breathing during the exercise. So we are almost induce a sense of air hunger, but
Yeah.
comfortably, not that it's going to cause a panic. And
Mm.
essentially during the exercise, you are under breathing. There's different ways to do it, and you're sitting with you're sitting with a carbon dioxide level that you're thinking, oh, I'd quite like to open my mouth. I'm feeling slightly suffocated, but it's okay. I can sit with it. And you're training your
Mm.
body to be more tolerant to it. And
Okay.
obviously, the more you do that, the more you reset your tolerance to it. And then obviously
Mm.
you make sure that you're breathing functionally, you know, your tongue's in the correct position and you've got your mouth closed and all that sort of stuff. And then when someone's breathing functionally, then you could bring in the hypoxic training. So
Mm.
that's the way
Yeah,
that I would
it
do it.
sounds kind of similar to what we do in swimming is we get people to breathe. So most people breathe like as long as they can breathe to both sides, they'll breathe
Yeah,
every 3 strokes.
yeah, yeah.
So we introduce like breathing every 5 strokes or
Yeah.
every 7 strokes and eat up to sort of like 9, I think. But you could probably
Wow.
go over. But that's, just to feel that like I want to breathe, but and then calm. A lot of it is like calming yourself down. It's okay. I don't need to breathe. I could, and sometimes you can think like the psychological side of it that you brought in earlier, remembering actually I on dry land or whatever, I've held my breath for, and people can hold their breath for, I don't know how long it is that most people can hold their breath for, but it's quite a long time, isn't it? Compared
Well,
to
it
nine
very much
breaths.
it varies and it depends how you do the
Yeah,
breath hold as to how long you can hold for.
yeah.
But exactly, so that training method that you're doing is training someone to do more with less, aren't they? Because you're asking
Yeah.
them to hold your breath. They're holding their breath, they're not releasing their waste product, so their carbon dioxide will be going up. And obviously, when they're feeling that, oh gosh, I've got air hunger, you are training them and, like you say, trying to relax into it. And what's
Mm,
really unusual about carbon dioxide is it induces that sort of slight fear panic response, that air hunger.
mm,
But actually, if you relax into it, it's a central nervous system suppressant. So it's a
mm,
narcotic gas. It can actually calm the brain and spinal cord. So actually, if you can sort of relax into it, actually, it's actually quite nice, which
Yeah, it
is
does
really
feel really
bizarre.
nice. Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's like, and there's the point when you have to go through it as well, because I was doing the stuff on the bottom of the pool, and it's like the first one, I get like three-quarters of the way, and I'm like, I have to come up. And then the next one, I'm like, okay, and go a bit further. And then when you do it, you're like, I could have carried on. That's fine, you know. And it does feel, you get a little bit of a high off it as well. So I think definitely, yeah, you're right with that. It's really interesting and nice to, yeah, it's just, it sort of works on all sorts of different levels, doesn't it? That kind of breathing and that breath work. I think
Because I
helps
mean,
us.
you're pushing yourself out of your comfort zone as well, and
Mm,
actually, that's a power, isn't it, to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable. So that,
yeah.
you know, and there's that's definitely something. And but what I'm seeing with my work is it's really interesting. So sometimes, I start very gently. So I'll start generally with the same exercise, and I see one person like, yeah, I felt a bit uncomfortable. And I see a startle response, same exercise, different person, and you do it, and oh, that was
Mm,
horrible. I didn't like that. And there's a very much, I think it's about a tolerance to the waste products, that feeling of being uncomfortable, but it's about how reactive our system is. So it's
yeah.
completely normal to react to our waste product. You know, carbon dioxide is our primary driver to breathe. Our body sends a suffocation signal because it's worried that we're not breathing. So it is
Mm,
right and normal, it does that, but it should be something that comes in at an appropriate time. And it almost should be like oh, you're not breathing. What's going on? What's going on? Giving a warning, giving a warning. And then if you don't act right, oh, you need to open your mouth now. Um,
mm,
but some people's, for various reasons, system becomes really like sort of sensitive or overreactive to it. And that's not, it's a physiological thing. It's not that they're making it up. It's a purely
mm,
physiological reaction. And sometimes I get people who um, suddenly remember when they were 5 how they nearly drowned and that they had that
mm,
feeling. I've had people who said that was how they felt when their child got seriously ill, their father died, maybe some abuse in the past, etc., etc.
mm,
And that feeling of air hunger gets tied up with that event. And
yeah.
there's almost, I think, what I've seen, and I have to be so gentle when we're in that situation with somebody, but almost learning then to become more tolerant and more normalizing the reaction to it. I think sort of I've seen people where they've been able to sort of separate that event from that feeling, and
Mm,
almost like a bit of a healing response.
yeah.
But you have to be very careful. Um, but yeah, I think there's so that in some people that feeling is really tied up with some potentially negative event in the past that's happened in their life.
Yeah, I can imagine that definitely because yeah, we attach things, don't we, when they happen and you don't even know sometimes until you do something like that and you're like, oh, okay, like you're saying, people come up, oh, and they remember things. So it's definitely really healing work as well for people. That's amazing. Um, I've forgotten what I was going to no, I think it was about recovery. So you mentioned recovery a little bit earlier about sleeping better and that impacting our recovery. And especially as we get older, as female athletes, you talked a little bit about how we probably have a little bit more stress response to things. So how can our breathing and how can we think about our breathing in that stage of life and also, does it change, can it change from day to day as well with things? I've had people, I've said it can do that when we're doing those breathing exercises. Sometimes you go in and you're like fine, and sometimes it just doesn't work. Is there anything that we need to be aware of with regards recovery and also our stress, how those two link?
Or massively. So if I don't obviously apologize to people if this is I'm teaching them to suck eggs, but I don't know where your audiences
Yeah,
of
no,
knowledge. So essentially all our unconscious processes are controlled by what we call the autonomic nervous system. So I was taught this at medical school, an amazing system. You know, if we truly, truly, truly think what our body's doing now. So me and you are here, we are not thinking about our blood pressure, our pulse, our saliva, pupil size, bowel bladder, genitals, how much stomach acid is being produced, whether your food's being digested, your hairs, whether they're flat or temperature control, you name it, it's all happening in the background. You know, it's truly amazing. And it's controlled. This is a simplistic explanation. It's two aspects of that. So we've got the fight, flight, freeze response, which medically we call the sympathetic nervous system. And when when the body perceives a threat, all those processes in the body are shifted more towards short-term survival, and like inflammation goes up, and the body's like primed just to sort of keep us surviving, like minutes, seconds, that type of thing. And what people don't often realize is how we breathe can shift it into fight, flight, freeze. So I got a dog got let off the lead accidentally. And I literally thought I was going to be attacked. There was no thought process in this. I breathed like like this. So I was breathing open mouth, big upper chest, holding my breath on the inhale. And my fear center, or I should say the amygdala, which has a role in fear, was looking at my breathing center, and it saw me change to that pattern and said, oh, she's in trouble. Louise is in trouble. Quick, fight, flight, freeze system up, put all those things into short-term survival. Luckily, the dog owner managed to get the dog and I was fine. And I knew, because of my breathing, like, right, I've got to tell my body I'm safe. So I breathed the opposite way, and to turn on the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is a system we don't talk enough about. So the lay terms for this would be rest and digest, feed and breed, or relaxation response. So the parasympathetic nervous system. And when the dial on this one turns up, the body feels safe, the body can go into repair and recovery. And inflammation comes down, and we breathe the opposite. So it's closed mouth, we breathe gently and silently and using the diaphragm. And so when the amygdala sees me breathing like that, oh, she's safe, she's okay, right, body, everything can go into more long-term survival. And it's more complicated than that. Both sides are on, and it's just about the dials. But all sorts of things. So if we're not living as we've been biologically programmed to live, so not having enough sleep, not being in nature, not having connection with others, eating processed food or drink, that your body feels a bit of threat with that because it doesn't recognize it, and that will put the fight flight up. If you're, I don't know, in a toxic environment at work, that will put it up. Hormones affect it. So there's all sorts of things. So it will vary day to day. But what's your unconscious breathing pattern? So when you're at rest, when you're on the computer, when you're in the car, when you're asleep, is it like I used to snore like this? That's telling my body I'm in threat. That's turning up my fight flight. I've now trained myself to breathe. And that's turning up my repair and recovery and safe system. So it's as profound as that. You know, how are you breathing when you're asleep? How are you breathing when you're resting? Are you driving a fight flight response by the way you're breathing? And I think this is my passion, the unconscious 24-hour breathing pattern. So it's really important. So it's very much tied up, and then how you're breathing is then manipulating your essentially your autonomic nervous system. And do your clients, do they do heart rate variability tracking? Do they tend to do that or not?
Sometimes, yeah, it depends what they're using as well. Like some is more accurate than others. So I use it in the morning. I use heart rate variability on my phone. It's like pretty good to measure, like when I'm ill. In fact, it's interesting actually because I've been tracking it for years, and it's gone down since, you know, through perimenopause, and I'm sort of late perimenopause now, I think. And it's definitely reduced
Issue,
through that time. Yeah.
And you don't think that's due to changes in your life, you think that is because of perimenopause?
There's some changes, like I'm not training as much, so
Mhm.
I'm training less for endurance stuff. So it was quite, it was pretty high. I was on the sort of high end of the what I don't know what those graphs are called, when they have the meme with
Yeah.
wherever you are on there. Whereas I'm back towards the medium. So it could be that, but it's been much more variable as well. Like
Yeah.
it just changes a lot more than it used to. So,
So this ties into, so heart rate variability is sort of it's a marker of the autonomic nervous system. So
mm,
generally we've been designed to be more parasympathetically driven most of the time, but we still need flexibility to go between the two. So because say with blood pressure, the fight flight system puts blood pressure up, but the parasympathetic puts it down. But say like you had someone who'd been swimming and they were relatively cold and then they came out and obviously they're hotter when they're running, their body needs a really flexible autonomic nervous system to cope
mm,
and adjust their blood pressure to cope so they don't pass out. And if you've got high heart rate variability, that's shown your autonomic nervous system is more parasympathetically driven, but also flexible. And
mm,
what I've got a blog on this on my website that perhaps you can tag in, but there was a
yeah.
paper that I read and I wrote the blog based on that, is they think that our autonomic nervous system becomes more fight flight driven, so more sympathetically driven as we go through perimenopause and menopause. So obviously heart rate variability based on that then would potentially drop. But that gives us choices then, doesn't it? If we know that, right, I might be more biologically programmed to be fight flight driven. So what can I do about it? So I think there's three things. One, is there anything in my life that I can reduce the fight flight response? So can I say no to people? Can I delegate? Can I get somebody else in to do it? Do I need to change jobs so I'm in a more less toxic environment? That type of thing.
Mm,
The second one, do I need to do more parasympathetically driven, put in some regular stuff to bring in the parasympathetic relaxation response? So do I need to shall I introduce some yoga, some meditation, just going for a walk and being in nature,
mm,
connecting with others, that type of thing. And then the other thing is consider your unconscious 24-hour breathing pattern. Is it driving a parasympathetic response? And particularly think about that when you're resting and sleeping, or is it driving a fight flight response, because you can change that. And
mm,
so I think that's really powerful for women to know,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, because it's always all the negative things that happen, but there is a lot that we can do as well, and it becomes quite a like a lot of work to do, like, and sometimes you don't feel like doing it, but if you can do it most of the time, then I think that's really good. It would make sense as well because, I rock climb as well, and I've heard climbers say that they get more scared as they get older. They get more anxiety and they don't want to do the same things that they used to when they get over a certain age and things. And it totally makes sense. Got a 15-year-old son that climbs and he just throws himself at everything, not concerned about falling off and I'm like, oh. So yeah, there's a bit of a contrast between us at the moment. But yeah, it would definitely make sense that we would have that if people are reporting that they're feeling more anxious, and it'll come out of nowhere sometimes as well. It's just like, why am I even feeling anxious? I don't really know why, which is confusing when you've been used to what your cycle and your rhythms. So it's
Oh, and we need
difficult.
more research on that, don't we? Because obviously, it was a brilliant paper. I think it's a really good paper.
Mm,
Obviously, that it's a sort of suggestion that this is happening, but like you and I have said, it just makes sense. We're
mm,
experiencing it. We know that. But then the question is why? What is it?
yeah.
Why is that happening? And obviously, it'll be related to hormones, won't it? And we know that estrogen is well, there's all sorts of, it's really interesting with hormones. We just haven't got enough research in hormones, and it
Mm,
absolutely needs to happen. Estrogen is an anti-inflammatory, calming hormone, and it does seem to have a powerful effect on, helping us. So, and they talk about rats in the study about how they when you suddenly remove estrogen from rats by taking their ovaries away, it has a really detrimental effect on their autonomic nervous system. And I see at work when I start HRT, particularly if we do it with the HRT that's more natural, actually their blood pressure improves often. So it does, estrogen seems positive on the autonomic nervous system. And I don't know the other thing, I don't know whether most people know this, but progesterone is an interesting hormone, but from a breathing perspective, it's a respiratory stimulant, so it makes us breathe faster. So this is a problem for athletes. So athletes that are menstruating, before they have their period, they'll have a peak in progesterone, which is normal because they've ovulated. This is assuming the athlete is ovulating, and this is assuming the athlete's not on a contraception that's stopping them, that's stopping them ovulating. But if they're menstruating normally and ovulating normally, they'll have a peak of progesterone before they have a period, but that makes them breathe faster. So obviously they're going to be at a slight disadvantage competing at that point because they're already slightly breathless or more breathless at rest compared to if they've been at another part in their cycle. But obviously, the more efficient their breathing is, the less that they would notice that. So, so I think, I think we need absolutely
really interesting. Yeah, it is interesting, and you definitely need more research on it because there's not. It's just like, what's happening? we
know
don't
it's
really
happening.
know. We know, and we can see the symptoms, feel the symptoms, and it's just confusing because I like to know why. I always like to know, why is this happening? Why do I feel like this? And we can't always know either, with things. So it's okay not to know as well. Otherwise, it's going to cause even more stress.
That's right.
Yeah. So we talked about breathing within athletics, and another thing I wanted to ask you is, if before races and events where people are anxious, are there any exercises that we can do that reduce that pre-race anxiety? Are there anything that you would recommend doing?
So obviously I think because you can feel different things, can't you? So obviously I what I really try and promote is actually having that mind body breath connection, that you can actually look into your body. How's my autonomic nervous system? So you might not understand why it's a certain way, and like you say, it doesn't necessarily matter, but actually thinking, right, how does my body feel? Is my body more fight flight driven, or is my body more relaxation response driven? Because then you can choose, do I need to upgrade? Because if you're a bit like, oh, I'm really chill, oh, I feel a bit tired, I can't be bothered, actually you're feeling a bit too relaxed, you need to get going. And what about if you're there and you're feeling butterflies and you're feeling anxious? Now obviously that means you actually want to downregulate a little bit, isn't it? So it's knowing, I think, first of all, to read your own body to then know what you want to do. And I think not everybody always knows that. So I think if you're feeling really, really anxious, notice how you're breathing. If you're feeling anxious, often what happens, the lips just come out a little bit more open. You just start to breathe just a little bit faster. Maybe that you're starting to feel the shoulders move a bit because you're feeling more anxious, or you might even be holding your breath, a bit like you hold your breath on the inhale because you're feeling anxious. So could you just really simply just close your mouth? And it might even just be that might be enough, because you just close your mouth, your nostrils are smaller than your mouth, so you're just starting to slow down and soften your breathing. If you can you hear yourself breathe? Again, if you're and you're breathing, you can hear yourself breathing, it's fast and upper chest. Could you just slow it down? Close your mouth and just gently soften and slow it down. Just bring your lips together and just slow it down. The humming could be a good one, couldn't it? Because humming, when you hum, you stimulate the back of the vagus nerve. So and you're just slightly prolonging that exhale, so that can be a good one as well. I mean, there's lots of different other techniques. It sort of slightly depends on someone's underlying breathing efficiency. But just generally, I'd say, if you notice you're breathing quite fast and big, can you just start to soften and slow down? Because I think what a lot of people don't realize is they say take a deep breath to calm down. So
Yeah.
what do you see people
You go,
do?
yeah.
So I've just, if people are listening to this and not seeing the footage, I'm taking a big breath, I'm using my upper chest, I'm not using my diaphragm. You're actually
Mm.
turning the fight flight response on with that. And that's why before I understood the type of breathing that I do, which is more a Buteyko breathing technique, I used to think breathing for me didn't calm me down at all. It made me feel wound up, and I now understand why, because I was doing exactly that. I was taking big breaths, upper chest, and that actually
Mm.
stimulates the it stimulates the fight, flight, freeze response, plus blows off carbon dioxide, which is not what you want when you want to be
Mm.
having that to help release oxygen. So I think if people are taking big open mouth breaths to calm down, actually just knowing that's actually you're doing the opposite. You're actually
Mm.
stimulating, you're actually driving that fight, flight response, and you're blowing off some of that carbon dioxide. So could we just simply get the lips sealed and just slow and soften it down? Yeah, so I think that was probably my tip with that.
Yeah, I remember it's just reminded me of the first time I did Ironman, and we were kind of like, you have to walk down to the start, and you walk through the town, and there's like drums playing, and there's people kind of watching, and it's kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I was standing next to some guys I knew, and everyone's kind of looking terrified. I said, just like breathe in, but then breathe out really like fully, like just take a big exhale out, breathe out long, and you know, make your out breath longer, because that's what I was doing at the time to calm myself down. And I saw these people sort of like looking at me, and they were all, everyone, I could feel everyone just go relax when
Yeah.
just two of us did it to relax, but you could feel the sort of energy around us change as well. Like people were like, "Oh, okay, I can relax. It's all right." So
And
it's really
you're dead right.
interesting.
The in breath is thought to be more fight flight driven, and the out breath more relaxation response driven. So exactly, if you can breathe in and sort of relax breath out through the nose, just and just slightly extend that, that definitely is more relaxing.
Mm. So if you're too relaxed,
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
can
yeah.
you do then? Because I get like that. I'm like, oh, I'm not really bothered. I just go and, yeah, I don't, not always
The
hyped.
I mean, it's a little bit so your you it's a little bit more complicated because you might be doing it before a race, but for me I do some breath holds
Okay,
before so if I want to up regulate, I'll breathe in, breathe out, and then I'll hold my breath after the exhale
right.
to because if you hold your breath for a while, it generates a bit of a fight flight response. But obviously you're
Okay.
holding it after the exhale, so it's driving a little bit more of a parasympathetic response. So I would just do some gentle breath holds just to make me feel a little bit more like awake.
Mm.
You wouldn't want to do lots of really strong breath because you're bringing up your carbon dioxide just before a race, which will be good, but there's a bit of an art to how you do that before a race, but you could certainly do it just to sort of just to wake yourself up a little bit. So,
Yeah.
but definitely, yeah. So I'd sort of be thinking that for me, I'd if I want to wake myself up, I breathe in, breathe out, pinch and hold, and I just do a little bit more of a prolonged breath hold, just to sort
Okay.
of generate that sort of a little bit of a like fight flight response, but not like too much or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fine. I'm just thinking, well, I'm thinking about it from a different perspective anyway, because I was thinking it's normally when I do like climbing competitions or something, or like a bouldering competition, which is very short. They're kind of short, powerful. You've got to kind of like go like that. And sometimes I'll be kind of, because I get nervous,
Yeah,
I calm myself down
yeah,
almost so much that I'm like, well, I'm not, it doesn't really matter. It's
yeah,
fine. And, which is kind of good, but also means that you don't always have that power and that sort of psyche to really go for things. So, but in triathlon, it's totally different to that sport because you're going for a long amount of time. So it's not quite so important that you get off to a really fast start or anything like that. You've got time to kind of find your feet in during the race. So
Well, you
they're
could,
kind of different.
I know some people sometimes do say like box breathing,
Oh yeah,
because box breathing, you sort of you're holding, you're doing a breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold. So you're sort of you're
yeah,
shifting the autonomic nervous system a little bit. So, but I'd just be you can do box breathing differently. So, obviously, box breathing you can do box breathing and over breathe whilst you're practicing the practice, or you can do it where you're not over breathing, depending on how big a breaths you're doing it with.
right.
And I suppose before a competition, I wouldn't want to be like over breathing because you're already then sort of setting your base
Mm.
rate higher, but you could just do some gentle box breathing, something like that, I think would be quite helpful.
Yeah, and then people don't actually breathe when they're climbing quite often. You sort of forget because you're holding your breath. And I'm like telling, breathe out, because that helps to sort of get you, yeah, to help you breathe in. I think breathing out can help you.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, that's on a different topic. I'm just being
yeah.
selfish because I'm like, we've got climbing competition going on.
I mean, there's so many things there's nuances to it, and this is the bit that I struggle on aspects like this because it very much depends on the person because
Mm,
it's how they want to steer their autonomic nervous system, but it also depends on their underlying breathing efficiency as to what they're capable of doing and what will be helpful and what will be unhelpful. So
uh,
there is nuances to it because if I did box breathing with some of my clients at the beginning of my program, there's no way that they could do it because their breathing is just
right.
because with box breathing, you automatically slow your breathing rate. If you slow it down to, if you did 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, you've gone to 8. Yeah, four. If you do 4 in, hold, 4. Oh, you'd be 16 seconds for a breath cycle, wouldn't you? Because you'd go breathe in for
Mm,
4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. So one breath cycle is taking 16 seconds. So you're going down to about 4 breaths per minute, which
yeah.
if you're doing that and not over breathing, you have to have quite an efficient breathing pattern to cope with that. And most of the people that I work with wouldn't be able to cope with that at the beginning without over breathing
Mm.
compensate. So there's such nuances in it that it's really difficult to sort of
Yeah,
explain
you can't.
short.
Yeah, you can't kind of give this is a great exercise. But I think I over the years I've experimented with stuff and
Yeah.
I've done yoga, breathing practices, and like meditation, and just like read lots of things as well, and experimented and found things that work and played around with that. But like, there's always more that you can learn and more that you can understand. So it's great to have you on and talking about this. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about, or that any last kind of tips or advice for people?
I think just I would just say just notice how you breathe. I think just notice how you breathe, particularly when you're at rest, and consider how you breathe when you're asleep. And I think if perhaps yourself or any other coaches that are listening to this, start asking your athletes how they breathe when they're asleep. And literally a simple question: do you sleep with your mouth open? Do you have heavy breathing or noisy breathing, or do you stop breathing during sleep? And and just watch the response. And if they don't know, then obviously they need to do a bit of observation or use a snoring app
Mm,
to record it or whatever. But I have to say, probably 80%, I'd say, if I had to guess, people you ask how they breathe when they're asleep and they know.
mm,
And if your breathing pattern is like that, that's impacting your sports performance.
mm,
And there's different levels of how you tackle that. I've got there's lots more information on my website about, and there's a podcast with Liz Earle that we specifically talk about snoring, so that might be one to listen to as well, and that's on my my website. But it's a problem, and to tackle how we breathe when we're asleep, it might be you need to have a sleep study, and it might be if you've got obstructive sleep apnea that needs treating with a CPAP machine or a mandibular advancement device. So there's a spectrum of it.
Right.
I see people more. Well, I work with people with those devices, and they still get benefit from improving their breathing. They might still need the devices, but they get better outcomes with it if you're breathing efficiently. But it's a spectrum, and in my mind, no stone should be unturned to get that person back to breathing in and out of the nose, slowly, gently, without stopping breathing. And it might involve multiple people to try and get that person. And unfortunately, some of it isn't necessarily available on the NHS. But if we want health and well-being, we need to breathe efficiently when we're asleep.
Okay, so that's your takeaway: breathing when you're asleep, and tuning into that and bringing it into your daily life as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. You've given loads of really interesting information, and I'll link to your website below, and people can find you there and read your blog. I'll link to that blog that you talked about with the study with perimenopause and all sorts, and they can reach out and get help as well from you, can't they? So
so if they want to improve their breathing efficiency with me, I've got a group program, an individual program, and I run retreats as well. So if they
lovely. That sounds nice. Great. Well, thank you very much, and you have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.